You're not anxious, your days just have no shape.
You wake up already behind, nothing bad is happening, but nothing is anchored either. There's no clear start, no containment, no sense of progression, just time stretching in every direction. So your system stays tense. You tell yourself the problem is anxiety, or motivation, or discipline, that you're fragile, overstimulated, or broken in some subtle way. But that explanation doesn't fit the evidence, because you can focus sometimes. You can work hard when forced. You can even feel calm and still drift. That contradiction matters. When the story is wrong, every solution fails quietly. You meditate, you optimize, you consume advice, but the discomfort keeps returning, slightly renamed each time. What if this isn't emotional at all? What if your nervous system is doing exactly what it evolved to do
Because your day gives it nothing to lean against.
when time has no landmarks? The brain stays on patrol. It doesn't know when effort begins, when it ends, or when it's safe to stand down. So vigilance becomes the default. Not panic, just constant readiness. This is why you feel on edge even on easy days. Not because you're anxious, but because nothing in the day signals safety or progress. No start, no finish, no gravity. Your biology fills the gap. And biology is expensive. There is a missing structure here. Not a routine, not a schedule, not time blocking. Something thinner, more fundamental. I'll name it in a moment, but first, you need to see how this failure actually shows up in your behavior. Your brain evolved to scan for uncertainty, not happiness. When the environment is ambiguous, it doesn't relax, it monitors. And time is part of the environment. When your day has no clear landmarks, no defined beginning, no contained middle, no recognizable end, your nervous system never receives the signal that things are under control. So it stays lightly activated all day long. Not panic, not fear, just a low-grade readiness that feels like anxiety without a story. This is why you can feel on edge even when nothing is wrong. Easy day, no emergencies, plenty of flexibility, and yet your body doesn't exhale. Because flexibility without structure doesn't feel like freedom to biology. It feels like exposure. You don't know when effort is required, when it's complete, or whether you're ahead or behind. So your system keeps asking the same unanswered question.
What am I supposed to be doing right now?
Every time that question stays open, the threat loop stays active. Most people misread this state. They think they're anxious about something, their productivity, their future, their performance. But often there is no object. It's unresolved temporal uncertainty, like standing in fog without mile markers. You don't know how far you've gone or how far remains, so stopping feels risky and continuing feels endless. That's not an emotional problem. That's a signaling problem. The smallest intervention here isn't productivity, it's containment. One fixed daily anchor. Same start ritual, same end ritual. No goals attached. No performance requirement. Just a reliable boundary that tells your nervous system, this day has edges. On bad days, this works because it removes ambiguity, not because it increases effort.
The relief isn't motivational, it's biological.
People think decision fatigue comes from making big choices. It doesn't. It comes from making small, unresolved ones over and over again. When your day has no spine, you're constantly deciding what matters right now. Should I start this? Switch to that? Check this first? Wait until later? None of these decisions close a loop, they just stack. Each one drains a little energy and leaves no sense of completion behind. So even before you start working, you're already tired. Not from effort, but from orientation. You're burning energy just figuring out where to point yourself. This is why you can sit down with time available and still feel resistance. The resistance isn't laziness. It's the cost of entering a decision-dense environment with no defaults. Think of it like a browser with dozens of tabs open. Nothing crashes. Nothing is technically wrong, but everything lags. Your mind is holding too many open questions at once. That lag is what you experience as friction, overwhelm, or avoidance. And the more you try to push through it with motivation, the more decision debt you accumulate. The replacement mechanism here isn't discipline, it's decision elimination. One pre-decided default task. The thing you do when the day feels unclear, when energy is low, when you don't know where to start. Not the most important task, not the most impressive one, the most obvious. On bad days, this works because it collapses choice. You don't have to decide what matters, you just enter doing mode. Momentum follows orientation, not the other way around. And once decisions stop leaking energy, something interesting happens. time starts to feel less flat. Which brings us to the next failure. When all hours feel equivalent, motivation doesn't decline, it collapses. The brain does not allocate energy evenly across time. It prioritizes contrast, edges, transitions, before and after. When your day lacks those distinctions, everything blends into a single, undifferentiated stretch. Afternoons bleed into evenings. Work bleeds into rest. Rest never restores because it's never clearly entered. And when nothing ends, nothing satisfies. This is why long, open days feel heavier than packed ones. It's not the workload, it's the flatness. Without temporal contrast, effort has no payoff horizon. There's no sense of almost done, no approach signal, no descent, just continuation. And continuation without contrast is cognitively exhausting. Your system doesn't know when to push and when to recover, so it half does both. You stay lightly engaged, lightly tired, lightly dissatisfied. People mislabel this as laziness or burnout, but often it's neither. It's temporal monotony. The brain is incredibly responsive to change. That's how it encodes meaning. When nothing changes, when location, posture, clothing, light, and activity all blur together, time loses texture.
And when time has no texture, motivation has nothing to grip.
The fix here is not variety everywhere. It's one sharp edge, one undeniable transition that tells your nervous system that phase is over. This one has begun. A walk outside, a shower with intention, a change of clothes, something physical, not digital. Not because it's healthy, but because the body needs to register a state change. On bad days, this works because contrast creates meaning without requiring productivity. You don't need to do more. You need time to feel different. Once time gains edges, another problem surfaces, one people confuse with freedom. Unlimited flexibility feels like autonomy, until you notice it doesn't create movement, it creates delay. When everything is possible, nothing is compelled. I can start anytime quietly becomes not now. And when now and later feel identical, there's no urgency signal. Your system keeps waiting for a moment that feels different enough to justify action. That moment rarely arrives. This is where people start blaming themselves. If I really cared, I'd start.
But caring isn't the missing variable.
Commitment is. Biology responds to constraints. Deadlines, windows, boundaries. They reduce cognitive load by narrowing possibility space. When those constraints disappear, your system has to simulate them internally. That simulation costs energy, so you stall, not from resistance, but from overload. This is constraint collapse. Freedom without edges doesn't feel safe or motivating. It feels like standing in an open field with no path. Direction becomes a personal burden, and the more important the task feels, the harder it is to choose a direction at all. So you wait, you adjust, you optimize, you drift. The solution isn't more pressure. It's artificial containment, time windows, public commitments, environment locks, working only in one location, starting only at one time, ending even if you're not done. These constraints aren't limitations, they're signals. They tell your nervous system, this is when effort happens. Outside of this, you're off duty. On bad days, this works because the structure carries the commitment. You don't have to convince yourself. You just enter the container. And once effort has a container, stimulation becomes visible for what it is, which is where most people get stuck next. By the time most people reach this point in the day, they assume they're burned out. But what's usually happening is more subtle. They're overstimulated without being satisfied. Modern environments are optimized for continuous low-grade input. Notifications, feeds, messages, background noise. None of it is intense enough to feel rewarding. None of it is quiet enough to allow focus, so your nervous system stays alert but unfulfilled, awake but aimless. This creates a specific state. You're not exhausted, you're underdirected. Dopamine isn't being released in meaningful peaks, it's leaking in tiny drips. Enough to keep you checking, not enough to create completion. Scrolling stops being entertainment and becomes anesthesia, and as a way to mute the discomfort of not knowing what to do next without actually resolving it. You're not seeking pleasure.
You're seeking relief from ambiguity.
This is why stimulation feels harder to quit than effort. Effort has edges, stimulation doesn't. It stretches to fill whatever space your day leaves undefined. And the flatter your time becomes, the more your brain defaults to whatever provides immediate signal, even if the signal is empty. The result is a wired but dissatisfied state people often label as anxiety. The fix isn't dopamine fasting or digital minimalism.
It's sequence correction.
Delay stimulation until after the first structured block of the day, no matter how small that block is. Not as punishment, as alignment. When effort comes first, stimulation regains contrast. Reward works again. On bad days, this survives because it doesn't require intensity-only order. One thing before the noise. That's enough to redirect the system. Identity isn't a belief. It's an accumulation. You don't trust yourself because your days don't prove anything consistently. Nothing repeats long enough to register as who you are. You start projects, you abandon rhythms, you oscillate between effort and drift. From the inside, it feels like inconsistency. From the nervous system's perspective, it's unreliability. This is where self-talk gets harsh. Why can't I stick to anything? But the problem isn't commitment. It's that time never reinforces identity. Days don't rhyme. Weeks don't stack. There's no narrative continuity, just episodes. And without narrative, the brain can't form a stable self-image. You don't know what to expect from yourselves, so you stay cautious around your own intentions. This is identity blur, not low self-esteem, not imposter syndrome, a lack of temporal reinforcement. Like a TV series with random episode lengths, no seasons, and no recurring themes. You can't tell what kind of show it is, so you don't emotionally invest. The intervention here is deceptively small.
Name your days by role, not task.
Builder day, operator day, recovery day.
The goal isn't accuracy, it's coherence. Roles compress complexity. They tell your system what mode you're in without negotiating every action. On bad days, this works because identity rides structure, not performance. Even a failed builder day still counts as a builder day.
Continuity survives.
And once identity stabilizes, the original question finally becomes clear. At this point, it's obvious what went wrong. Anxiety wasn't the cause, it was the signal. A response to temporal disorder, a nervous system compensating for missing structure. You tried to calm yourself instead of fixing the environment. You treated the smoke instead of checking the alarm. This is why reassurance never sticks, why mindset work helps briefly and then fades, why productivity advice feels good but collapses under low energy. You are asking your emotions to solve a structural problem, but peace doesn't come from positivity. It comes from predictability, from knowing when effort begins, when it ends, and what today is. The correction is not emotional regulation first.
It's temporal stabilization.
Stabilize when things happen before optimizing how you feel. When anchors, transitions, constraints, and roles line up, anxiety loses its fuel source, not because life is easier, but because it's legible. The system no longer has to guess, and that's the shift. You stop being someone who's trying to feel better. You become someone who moves through days with shape. Calm isn't forced, it's implied by structure. At this point, the pattern should be unmistakable. When biology, decisions, stimulation, and identity all orbit unstable time, the nervous system has to compensate. It stays alert, it scans, it hesitates. Not because you're broken, but because nothing else is holding the day upright. Once you stop treating that response as a flaw and start treating it as feedback, everything reorganizes. This is where the structure becomes visible. What you've been missing isn't motivation or discipline.
It's a temporal spine, not a rigid schedule, not a productivity system.
A partial architecture your day can lean against. Something that gives time gravity,
Without micromanaging behavior.
anchors that define when a day starts and ends. Transitions that create contrast between states. Constraints that carry commitments so you don't have to. And a narrative that lets identity accumulate instead of resetting every morning. When those pieces lock together, anxiety doesn't need to be managed.
It loses relevance.
The nervous system finally receives the signals it's been waiting for. Effort has a container, rest has permission, and today has a shape. You don't feel calm because you're telling yourself everything is okay. You feel calm because the environment is finally legible. This is the identity shift most people miss. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's trying to get it together or working on anxiety. You become someone who moves through days with structure, even when energy is low, especially when energy is low. That's what a real system does. It survives bad days. It doesn't depend on mood.
It doesn't negotiate with motivation. It holds.
Here's the filter to keep. If your days don't have a spine, your nervous system has to hold you upright, and it will.
At a cost.
Structure isn't about control, it's about survivability. That's the layer most advice never reaches.
And it's where we'll go next.